Lopez relished the attention. He wasn't shy about discussing his crimes or philosophizing about life and death on camera.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're looking at the most violent and notorious serial killers, whose crimes will be sure to keep you up at night.
Satan is a stabilizing force in my life. It gives me a reason to be, an excuse to rationalize.
Carla Homolka and Paul Bernardo. It isn't often that the aftermath of a case becomes more infamous than the crimes themselves. In Canada in the early 1990s, couple Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka committed a series of sexual assaults and murders against young girls, including the latter's younger sister.
There never was before and never was since such a string of attacks like that.
People were scared stiff for a very long time.
They recorded themselves committing lurid acts against their victims before killing them, evidence that was instrumental in their capture. The two had conflicting recollections of the misdeeds, with each partner attempting to downplay their own involvement.
What was certain, however, was that together, Bernardo and Homolka were a deadly duo.
Bernardo received a life sentence for the slaughters and his involvement in previous cases. Homolka managed to secure a plea bargain after claiming manipulation, and while it allowed her to be released in 2005, it also branded her as a permanent enemy of the public. Luis Gavarito. Although he's one of the deadliest killers to come out of South America, he's still relatively unknown.
Committing his crimes in various regions of Colombia, South America in the 1990s, he eluded Colombia's authorities for 9 long years.
Often referred to as La Bestia, Colombian Luis Gavarito was found to have been guilty of the violent assault and murder of almost 200 children throughout the 1990s. His horrific crimes spanned across multiple countries and methods, with many being purely sexual in nature. The extent of his vile behavior, which often included mutilation and dismemberment, led to an initial sentence of more than 1,800 years, but it was eventually reduced to 22 years.
Garavito defended himself by saying that in every instance, he had been possessed by a malignant spirit.
His lenient punishment ultimately led to the maximum sentence being extended in Colombia. And although he could have been eligible for parole in 2023, he died before that happened. Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. Although their butchery took place 60 years ago, they're still considered some of the worst people to come out of the United Kingdom.
Brady and Hindley and the Moors murder killings, one of the landmark cases of the 20th century.
Working as a unit, they took the lives of several children while attempting to commit what they referred to as the perfect murder. The attacks were sexual and violent in nature, with some victims being subjected to intense humiliation before their deaths. After they were captured in 1965, Hindley insisted upon her innocence for years, all while being branded as one of the most evil women in the country. She, in particular, ended up becoming a notorious figure, and even her own mother advocated that she stay in prison.
He, in many ways, escaped some of the disgust that the public should feel for him because he was accompanied by a woman, and I'm not sure that he got his fair share of public hatred.
Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris. Though their crimes only spanned 5 months, the evidence they left behind will send chills down anyone's spine.
Even including Charles Manson, I had never seen two people so depraved.
Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris, known as the Toolbox Killers, targeted several teenage girls in California during their short-lived spree in 1979. They were known for the array of devices they used, from ice picks to hammers, and for recording the torture they inflicted. They were meticulous in their plans, even innocently picking up hitchhikers for months beforehand to practice for the real thing. After their arrest, their recordings were played in court, causing several people to walk out in horror. Although Norris claimed that Bittaker was the true mastermind, he still found enjoyment in their sexual torture, making his supposed remorse practically meaningless.
They were evil. They were just pure evil.
Peter Sutcliffe. It should come as no surprise that someone compared to the likes of Jack the Ripper would make this list.
The whole of Britain was terrified by the elusive murderer who seemed to kill for his own enjoyment.
Yorkshire's Peter Sutcliffe attacked and murdered over a dozen women, often in extremely violent and degrading ways. He claimed to have been following the orders of a higher power during his spree, even referring to his victims as filth and implying that their fates were deserved. He took advantage of flaws within the police system, allowing him to evade capture despite having been questioned several times. This gave him the opportunity to take even more lives. After he was finally arrested and sentenced, he was assaulted multiple times, giving him a small taste of the violence he inflicted upon his victims.
Sutcliffe's legacy casts a deathly shadow over the lives he took and the lives he left behind.
David Burkowitz. One man had the entirety of New York City looking over their shoulders.
And it's something that we all have to worry about.
What is your wife saying?
She wouldn't even come out tonight.
While his methods weren't as intricate as others, David Burkowitz was still able to take the lives of 6 people in the 1970s. He even mocked the police with letters as they struggled to identify him. This led to his nickname, the Son of Sam, being popularized in the media, adding to his notoriety. When he was finally apprehended in 1977, he showed no emotion and in fact seemed annoyed that he'd been found out. In recent years, he has claimed to be reformed.
That was just a break from reality and thought I was doing something to appease the devil. I'm sorry for it.
Despite that, many rightfully can't see anything other than the killer he once was. Eileen Woos. In just 1 year, she killed 7 people in Florida. Beginning in 1989, sex worker Eileen Woos used her profession as a way of meeting and choosing her victims.
In her mass murder spree, hardened killer Eileen Woos targeted middle-aged wealthy men with expensive cars.
While she claimed that each man had attacked her first, her constantly shifting narratives and the sheer number of bullet wounds in each body suggested otherwise. Even after being sentenced to death row, she never showed any remorse for her crimes, and even doubled down on her own sanity being fully intact during the murders. Her anger lasted throughout her tenure in prison and up until her final moments, when she swore to return after her own demise.
Lee, it sounds like you've been betrayed by everyone.
That's right, I was. That's why I don't care if I'm executed and leave this planet.
Her motives and acts still inspire debate today. Dennis Nilsson. From the outside, his homes look unassuming, obscuring the unfathomable acts that took place within them.
One of the biggest murder investigations ever is now underway in London after the discovery of the remains of 3 men's bodies.
It was horrific. It made the hair in the back of my neck stand up.
Dennis Nilsson would use his 2 London residences to lure his victims in before striking. He took the lives of at least 12 males via strangulation or drowning, but he didn't stop there. He kept the bodies in his homes for weeks, changing their outfits and living beside them. It wasn't until they decayed that he would dismember and dispose of them. He got away with it for years, until his plumbing became so clogged by remains that they were discovered. After hearing the evidence, it took the jury only a day to reach their verdict, leading to him spending his days behind bars until his death in 2018.
He knew perfectly well he would be found guilty, and he knew he deserved it. He knew he should be.
Richard Ramirez. His violent acts would make even the bravest person feel sick. Beginning in 1984, the man known as the Night Stalker went on a reign of pure terror in California.
The Night Stalker killed at least 13 times, 13 people who were awakened in the night to face death. At least 15 others survived his brutal attacks.
Using a wide variety of methods, from live wires to guns, he would put his victims through intense pain before taking their lives. What made his crimes even more horrifying was the arbitrary aspect to them, as he would choose what houses to break into at random. He even forced multiple people to swear on Satan, adding another sickening layer to his abhorrent acts. After he was finally convicted on over 40 different charges in 1989, he was set to be executed, but ended up passing away before he could face the ultimate consequence.
Ramirez became a celebrity in his own right, and he had groupies, he had marriage proposals, he had women that wanted to come and visit him at the prison.
Gary Ridgeway, one of the most prolific killers in the country, is still alive to this day.
Gary Ridgeway is probably the most prolific serial killer in America, if not the world.
He was a killing machine, a man of extraordinary evil.
Known simply as the Green River Killer, Gary Ridgeway took the lives of at least 4 dozen women throughout the 1980s and 90s. His violent streak began as a child and only continued to spiral well into adulthood. He strangled each victim, but the evil didn't stop there. He would even return to some of the corpses after the act and abuse them in death. It wasn't until 2001 that he was finally caught and sentenced, where a plea deal saved him from being executed. With his victims still being identified as recently as 2023, the full extent of his violence may never be fully revealed.
We now know she was killed by Gary Ridgeway. I spoke with her family on the phone today. They say they appreciate that they now have closure, but they say it's heartbreaking knowing Ridgeway is still alive while their loved one is dead.
Dennis Rader. Having named himself BTK after his modus operandi, for 20 years, Rader was a massive thorn in the side of the police in Kansas.
When BTK came forward, everybody's life changed. He would see a woman walking and he would say, "She's next."
Like the infamous Jack the Ripper, he sent mocking letters to the cops and media. But in person, Rader seemed nice. He had a loving family and was the president of his local church congregation. His first victims were the Otero family in 1974, and his 10th and last victim was Dolores Davis in 1991. Then he dropped off the map. But in 2004, he began taunting them once again. However, he got sloppy with a floppy disk, and it was traced to his church.
He asks the police in one of the communications, what if I were to give you a floppy disk with more details of the killings? Could you identify me?
In 2005, Rader pleaded guilty and got 10 consecutive life sentences. Robert Hansen. As a teenager, Robert Hansen would take part in hunting to escape his rough home life. But as he got older, his victims went from animals to human beings. He would abduct women, often sex workers, and assault them before driving or flying them out to the wilderness. Here was where he would hunt them down like prey, toying with their lives. Nicknamed the Butcher Baker by the media, Hansen was confirmed to have assaulted and killed at least 17 women.
In his confession, Hansen described how he would take his victims into the woods and hunt them as prey.
In 1983, a teenage sex worker named Cindy Paulson was set to be on that list. However, she managed to escape when he was stalking his plane and alerted the authorities, who would arrest him. He received a sentence of 461 years and died in prison after serving 31 years.
After his sentencing, Hansen accompanied troopers into the field to find more of his victims, represented by X's on his map.
Israel Keyes. What's most terrifying for the police and the public is a killer with no MO. But to make things worse, how about one who was also trained by the U.S. Army? This was the case of Israel Keyes.
I would let them come to me. Just remote area. Come go to a remote area that's not anywhere near where you live, but that other people go to as well.
Across the country, Keyes had set up kill kits, which gave him access to equipment wherever he decided to attack someone. After he killed 18-year-old Samantha Koenig, the FBI was able to track his bank account use and make an arrest following the demand for a ransom.
Police arrested 34-year-old Israel Keyes 4,000 miles away in Texas.
Once he was in custody, however, it was discovered that Keyes was responsible for the murder of multiple victims.
We did spend a fair amount of time talking about his crimes and his offenses as well, and those times were definitely very chilling to hear him talk about what he's done.
Before he faced trial in 2012, Keyes took his own life, and taking with him information that might have been used to solve other crimes. Marcel Peto. With France under German occupation in the 1940s, Marcel Peto, a doctor, preyed on those attempting to escape persecution. Later claiming he was working for the resistance, even though there was no evidence, Peto set up a fake escape route under the name Dr. Eugène.
In the midst of the German occupation during World War II, Peto is considered a hero for operating a secret escape route for Jewish people attempting to leave Paris.
He gave those running a fake vaccine containing cyanide before stealing their valuables and disposing of their bodies. 23 remains were discovered, but Peto's lifetime victim count is suspected to be as high as 60, if not higher. In 1946, Peto was executed by guillotine, which was still the country's method of capital punishment at the time.
His last words? "Gentlemen, I ask you not to look. This will not be very pretty."
Karl Denka. Born in modern-day Poland in 1860, Karl Denka appeared to be a beloved member of his community. After all, they nicknamed him Papa as he let homeless people live in his house for free and volunteered at his local church for a time. But away from prying eyes, he held a very dark secret. In 1924, a badly injured Vincenz Olivier alerted townsfolk that he was attacked by Denka. While the authorities didn't believe him, they later arrested their stand-up citizen as they investigated. Shortly after, Denka took his own life. The police then found human remains of at least 30 people in his house, some of which were made into items. There's also speculation Denka sold the remains to unsuspecting locals. Joseph James D'Angelo. Police officers are meant to be honorable and find justice for victims, not cause a wake of destruction like Joseph James D'Angelo.
For decades, Joseph James D'Angelo was America's most wanted man, the Golden State Killer.
In 1976, he began his spree of assaults and burglaries in Sacramento, California. In the space of 3 years, he had committed 50 attacks. By 1978, D'Angelo progressed by slaying Brian and Katie Maggiore. He morphed into the original Night Stalker and later the Golden State Killer before the crime stopped in 1986. Then, in 2018, the police used genetic genealogy from the DNA found at D'Angelo's crimes to trace it back to him.
The search takes anywhere from 24 to 48 hours. Within a day, I had the list of potential relatives to the Golden State Killer.
In 2020, amongst several charges, he pled guilty to 13 murders as part of a deal to avoid capital punishment and got a life sentence.
But tonight, the Golden State Killer muttering this apology to his victims.
And I'm really sorry.
Moments later, Joe D'Angelo was sentenced to life without parole.
Dean Corll. After leaving the Army in 1965, Dean Corll returned to Houston, Texas to work in the family candy business. He was known to hand out free treats to children, earning him the nickname Candyman.
Known as the Candyman, because of his family's sweet shop that used to be across from a school off 22nd Street.
Shortly after, he began a relationship with the underage David Owen Brooks. When Corll began his killing spree in 1970, Brooks helped him select victims. Corll then got Elmer Wayne Hindley involved too. In 1973, after slaying 28 people, Corll decided to take out Hindley along with 2 other victims. The teenager managed to convince Corll that he was on his side. But when the opportunity arose, Hindley fatally shot his former mentor. Both Brooks and Hindley received multiple life sentences. David Parker Ray. Sometimes killers go that extra terrifying mile with their modus operandi. David Parker Ray modified a trailer that would be labeled his toy box. The trailer was soundproofed and filled with instruments for his violence.
He called it the Den of Satan.
He would abduct women, abuse them for months in the trailer, and presumably eventually end their lives, sometimes with accomplices, one of them being his girlfriend, Cynthia Hendy. In 1999, a woman managed to escape the toy box after 3 days and get help from a neighbor.
That's what I went through. And these families deserve to have these people to know what happened.
The police immediately arrested Ray and Hendy. On a plea deal, Ray was sentenced to 224 years in jail, while Hendy, who testified against her former partner, got 36 years. It's unknown how many women Ray killed, but some estimates are upwards of 60.
He claimed to have abducted 40 women from across the U.S. Since no bodies were ever found, he was never charged, and he never will be. Ray died in prison in 2002 by heart attack.
Edmond Kemper. At 6'9", Edmond Kemper was an intimidating figure.
I was dreaming, thinking, fantasizing murder all day long. I couldn't get it out of my head.
But with his gentle demeanor, he seemed harmless. However, as a teenager in 1964, he fatally shot his grandparents. 5 years later, he was released from a psychiatric hospital and went to live with his abusive mother, Clarnell Strandberg. By 1972, Kemper began driving around Santa Cruz, California, picking up young women who were hitchhiking. He would act impatiently, which enticed them inside the vehicle since they believed he was too busy to be an attacker.
In custody, Edmond Kemper would reveal to investigators the full horror of his extraordinary crimes, in minute and graphic detail.
But he was. This MO earned him the nickname the Co-Ed Killer. In 1973, he brutally killed his mother and her friend before handing himself to the police. With 10 victims altogether, Kemper received a life sentence. Andrei Chikovi. Having grown up in difficult circumstances in rural Ukraine under USSR rule, something broke in Andrei Chikovi. But to the outside world, all seemed okay. He had a wife, 2 kids, and began working as a school teacher in 1971.
As a teacher, the 34-year-old hoped to find acceptance and respect, and yet instead he found constant humiliation. His students didn't take him seriously. They refused to behave and smoked right in front of him in the classroom.
But not long after getting the job, Chikovi began assaulting pupils. By 1978, he moved on to killing, with his wife providing him an alibi. Using jobs that required traveling as a cover, by 1990, Chikovi claimed to have slain 56 people, mostly in the Rostov Oblast, earning him the moniker the Butcher of Rostov. After being arrested and later confessing to his tirade of crimes, Chikovi was held in a cage in court.
He probably, in some respects, wanted to be caught. I can't imagine somebody doing that for all those many years and not realizing that he was living in a hell of his own creation.
He was found guilty and executed in 1994. Ted Bundy. In the 1970s, many women came to the aid of a man, often appearing injured, who needed help in one form or another. With his good looks and charisma, this mystery guy seemed genuine. Instead, he was one of the most infamous killers in history as he forced his victims into his car.
The chances he took, it's not just that he went out and committed murder, but he seemed impervious to fear. And from there, the nightmare began.
Ted Bundy escaped capture multiple times, continuing his grim spree as he did. But by 1980, he faced court for the final time. Bundy had confessed to slaying 30 women and teenagers across multiple states in the U.S. However, there's speculation that the true figure could be over 100. For the third and final time in his life, Bundy was sentenced to capital punishment, which took place in 1989.
So it ended for Ted Bundy. 10 years, 28 confessions, millions in Florida's legal battle to end his life.
Ed Gein. Serving as inspiration for several horror movie villains, such as Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs and Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Ed Gein was a disturbing killer.
Twisted Killer was a quiet loner named Ed Gein. Hidden inside the 51-year-old's rural farmhouse was a ghoulish treasure trove.
He was raised by an abusive mother that taught him that women were evil. In 1957, one Bernice Warden vanished in Wisconsin. Following a lead, the police arrived at Gein's isolated house and discovered a terrible scene. On top of Warden's body, they found a catalog of items made from human remains. Altogether, there were pieces made from around 40 people. Gein claimed to have grave robbed most of the remains. In 1968, he was deemed fit to stand trial and was found guilty of Warden slaying. Gein spent his remaining years in psychiatric hospitals.
He was such a little person that I found it hard to picture him as the person who'd committed all these homicides. He lived there very peacefully. He never caused any problems.
John Wayne Gacy. One pretty common phobia is clowns, and the case of John Wayne Gacy certainly didn't help ease any of those fears.
36-year-old John Wayne Gacy was a popular socialite who spent his weekends dressed as a clown, entertaining children.
Gacy regularly performed in a clown persona at parties and events, but behind the scenes, he was a rampant killer of boys and men. In 1978, after suspecting the police were onto him, a paranoid Gacy would confess his crimes to his lawyers. The police had what they needed to search his house, where they would find several remains in his crawl space.
29 bodies buried in that house of his on Summerdale, a crime of horrendous proportions. In the crawl space underneath, bodies covered with lime and encased in plastic.
He was charged with the assassination of 33 young men and would spend 14 years on death row before being executed by lethal injection.
It was a circus. We were in a room at some point and we saw a television screen and we saw thousands of people lined up at least a mile down the street at the prison with signs, "Kill the clown, kill Gacy."
Fred and Rosemary West. Occasionally, serial killers come in pairs.
You're talking about two people who literally plumb the depths of human depravity.
While Fred had murdered in the past before meeting Rosemary Letts, Rose's first victim was purportedly Fred's stepdaughter. The two then went on a rampage, assaulting and killing 9 other people together, including West's first wife, Catherine Costello, and their daughter, Heather West. Many of the bodies were buried on their properties.
Even though they were not alive, he wants access. He wants to feel that he can actually be part of this area, and they are part of this area. This is his private graveyard.
After investigating assault charges against the couple, the police found evidence of the violence. Although officially charged with 12 killings altogether, that number is estimated to be higher. In 1995, before his trial, West took his own life, and Letts was sentenced to life in prison.
And I was absolutely gutted. I wanted him to pay the proper price. And he just took his own way out and had his own way about what happened to him. He was in control right to the end.
Jeffrey Dahmer. From his late teens, Jeffrey Dahmer began a horrific killing spree. His victims were all men or boys, and many of his later crimes involved unspeakable acts to the bodies.
Jeffrey Dahmer was responsible for killing more than a dozen people. The majority of those murders happened in an apartment near the Marquette campus.
In 1991, Dahmer enticed Tracy Edwards back to his apartment with the promise of beer and payment for photographs. However, Edwards realized something was wrong and managed to escape. After he flagged down police officers, Dahmer's apartment was investigated and grim evidence was found, leading to Dahmer's arrest.
His macabre 13-year crime spree finally ended when this man, Tracy Edwards, brought the police to the infamous apartment. Like the others, he had gone there with the promise of money.
He was listening to my heart because at a point he told me he was going to eat my heart at that point.
He was convicted of 15 murders and sentenced to life imprisonment. However, in 1994, he was fatally attacked by fellow inmate Christopher Scarver.
There were a number of people who felt that Jeffrey Dahmer got exactly what he deserved. When I called his mother, she said, well, now everybody got what they want. The monster is dead. And then she said, he was my son. He was my boy.
Albert Fish. Nearly 100 years ago, New York had a killer on the loose, nicknamed many things, including the Gray Man and even the Boogeyman. Honestly, it's not too far off. Albert Fish was a disturbed individual who targeted children. While we can't exactly list off the crimes toward them, just know they're terrible. To make things even more disturbing, the unhinged Fish sent the mother of one of his victims a letter describing what he did. 10 years after Fish began his acts, he was captured in 1934 after witnesses claimed to have seen him with missing children. Fish would admit to the murders, but would also claim he had over 100 victims. At his trial the following year, he was sentenced to execution, which was carried out in 1936. H.H. Holmes. Thought of as one of the U.S.'s first serial killers, Herman Webster Mudgett, better known as H.H. Holmes, dabbled in fraud in his early years to earn cash. Then he constructed what would be nicknamed the Murder Castle in Chicago, Illinois. It contained secret passageways and trap doors that allowed Holmes to slay privately and dispose of the evidence in the basement's furnace.
But what Holmes has done is to create really a killing machine, a factory.
He would usually entice women into the building and later opened it up like a hotel. In 1894, Holmes was arrested for a different crime before his killing was discovered. He confessed to 27 victims, but loftier speculations have the number over 200. In 1896, Holmes was executed for his grim crimes.
You are cleansed and delivered. May God have mercy on your soul.
As Holmes waits for his life to come to an end, he remains cool and composed.
Samuel Little. In 2019, the FBI confirmed that they'd identified Samuel Little as the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history. After being convicted for slaying 3 people in 2014, the unsettling extent of his crimes began to leak out over the next few years. By 2018, Little had confessed to killing 93 women across the country.
It's disturbing to listen to, but investigators want to hear it all and more. 79-year-old Samuel Little has confessed to 93 murders. That's more than were committed by Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer combined.
Little provided the FBI with details on many of the cases from 1970 to 2005. and even drew the victims from memory to prove he was telling the truth.
These are the portraits drawn by Samuel Little himself to the women he claims to have killed. They're so accurate that family members have recognized lost loved ones from them.
Before he passed away in 2020, more than 60 of Little's confessions across at least 14 states had been confirmed by the authorities. Harold Shipman. Doctors are meant to be people we all trust. This makes the case of Harold Shipman especially chilling. He was a general practitioner in England who took people under his care only to end their lives.
5 of the 15 women he's been convicted of murdering died in his surgery. Normally, doctors have no such deaths. He signed 70% of his death certificates. Normally, it's no more than 30%.
In 1998, one of his patients suddenly passed away, and a will, one that the family knew nothing about, gifted a lot of cash to Shipman. Police investigated the doctor and found evidence of forgery.
He falsified computerized medical records, he entered false information on his victims' death certificates, and lied to their families.
Upon further examination, they found that many of his patients seemed to pass from overdoses of diamorphine. In 1999, Shipman was charged with the murder of 15 patients, many of whom were older women. He was sentenced to life in prison, and in the aftermath, there were thought to be as many as 250 victims.
Now he's taken his own life. He was found in his prison cell at 6:20 a.m.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into settings and switch on your notifications. Pedro Lopez. What's worse than a serial killer? Well, how about a known one authorities can't currently locate? Born in Colombia, Pedro Lopez was a serial murderer across South America and was nicknamed the Monster of the Andes.
It seemed impossible that one man could have carried out so much violence. If Lopez was telling the truth, he'd rank among the most prolific serial killers in history.
In 1980, after attempting to abduct someone, Lopez was arrested in Ecuador. He was soon charged with 110 homicides. However, Lopez reportedly confessed that his victims could total more than 300.
Lopez, it seemed, hoped to gain a twisted kind of immortality.
Esto queda en la historia, ¿sí o no? Si me van a pasar al panteón, yo estoy muy joven para morir.
In 2006, the Guinness World Records actually named him the most prolific serial killer before it was taken down in bad taste. Unfortunately, Lopez was released for good behavior in 1998 and was declared sane. But as of 2002, after being linked to another murder, his whereabouts are unknown.
He went back into the countryside he knew so well, to the killing ground where he had found so many victims. That was the last time anyone reported seeing Pedro Alonso Lopez.
Which of these killers' crimes disturbs you the most? Let us know in the comments below.